Hey everybody, it's Miss Steele. I decided to create a PowerPoint with a voiceover so that we could move into the next topic. The CK12 curriculum does not cover the topic of classification and dichotomous keys, so I'm making this so that you have something to look at, learn new vocabulary from, and study for. So let's go ahead and get started. This topic is going to be classification, which is we want to know, how do scientists classify living organisms? So first of all, what is classification? Classification is the process of arranging groups of organisms together based on their similarities. The word taxonomy is used to describe the study of organism classification. So sometimes you may see the word taxonomy, sometimes you may see classification. Sometimes people use them interchangeably, and that's okay. So classifying organisms makes it easier for scientists to study and identify them. So in the picture on the left, there are two groups. There are a group of vertebrates, which are organisms that have backbones, and there are invertebrates, which are organisms that do not have backbones. So we have classified them based on their having a backbone or not having a backbone. So that's one simple way of classifying. So on the right, there is a picture of my closet. So all of the items in the picture are normally in my closet, and they all belong in a closet because they're all articles of clothing. But I have my shoes separated on the top rack of the closet, and then I also have my shirts, dresses, jackets, and pants separated into different groups in my closet. And I do this because it makes it easier to find what I want to wear. So this is similar to how a scientist would classify organisms into different groups. They put them all into these separate groups so they can easily determine what they are, and maybe what their name is. So what are some other things that could be classified? Since you're at home watching this, why don't you look around the room and find something that you could classify. It may be easier to find than you think, because all I did was take a picture of my closet and I realized that everything in there is organized into separate groups. Two examples that I put below are maybe a pantry. So in this picture of the pantry, they have like all of the baby food category like in one bin altogether. They have all of the like flour and sugar and all the baking goods into a bin together. They have all their canned goods in a separate location. So that would be one way to classify and organize. And then the other picture is a picture of a desk. They have glue sticks, highlighters, colored pencils, tape, and everything is separated into a different section. So look around your room and see what you could classify. So there are different levels of classification, and scientists use this system of classification to organize and name organisms. So we classify organisms based on their phylogeny, and the word phylogeny basically means we're classifying them based on their evolutionary history. We've already talked about evolution in class, so this part may make a lot of sense to you. So if we want to know how two organisms are related, we can look through their evolutionary history and see that maybe they have a common ancestor or that they don't have a common ancestor, so maybe they aren't actually related like we thought they were. So we can use these levels of classification to help us do that. So we're not just taking a guess. This is a scientific way of looking at it and being able to come up with a good answer. So the picture on the right are the different levels of classification. It starts with domain, which would have the largest number of organisms within it. So we have domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Species would have the least number of organisms because if we're talking about a specific species of animal, that's just one type of that animal. When we're talking about a domain, we're talking about a bunch of animals, and the way that we have them divided is very broad. But when we get all the way down to species, it's a very specific way of dividing organisms. So let's take a few minutes and come up with a way to remember the 7 levels of classification from largest to smallest. Um, the way that I remember it is through something called a mnemonic device, which is kind of like an acronym. So I take the first letter of each of the levels from largest to smallest, and I come up with like a sentence that would help me remember it. And the one that I came up with when I was in 7th grade was, do kings play chess on fine grained sand? So I have that highlighted in the blue, and in the green are the levels of classification that go with each of those. So come up with one for yourself. It doesn't have to be what mine is. It can be anything, as long as it's appropriate for school. But you will need to know this pretty much for the rest of middle school and high school. And if you go on to college and take science classes, you will need to know it then. And I still remember the one that I came up with when I was in 7th grade to this day. So come up with something that you'll remember. So like pause the video if you need to, come up with something, and then come back. So the first level of organization that we're going to talk about is domain. So I have a picture of an arrow pointing to domain, but once again, you can see that domain is going to be at the top, species is going to be at the bottom. Domain is going to be the largest group of animals, and it's not going to have a lot of different classifications within it. So there are 3 groups that make up the domains, and all organisms will fit into one of these 3 domains. So we have Archaea, Eubacteria, and Eukaryota. So the picture on the right has a green circle, red circle, and a blue circle. So you can read through here and see what all would be in each of these groups. The one that we focus on the most in middle school would definitely be the Eukaryota, because that includes the fungi, animals, and plants. So we humans would be part of this group. And then the other sections, we also study them, but it's a little harder to study because most bacteria and archaea we can't necessarily see with the naked eye, or they're just very, very small. So it's kind of hard to wrap our heads around that. But we're going to look at each of the groups. So the first group would be archaea. These are single-celled organisms, so they are made of just one cell. They do not have a nucleus, which means that they are prokaryotes. I know that we've already talked about the cell structure in the human body and things like that. So this might be an old word for you, but I highlighted it and underlined it because this is a very important word. You do need to know this. If an organism does not have a nucleus, or its cells do not have a nucleus, it is a prokaryotic cell. Archaea live in extreme environments. Not always, but a lot of them do. So in like a hot spring, or a geothermal vent at the bottom of the ocean where the water that comes out is very, very hot. So they can live in very hot, very cold, or very acidic environments. So we actually have archaea that could live like in our stomachs because it's very acidic. So I thought that was very interesting. And the picture on the right would be, if you may have seen a picture like this before where the water kind of looks like a rainbow, but this is caused by archaea living in an extreme environment. So we would have to assume that this water, wherever it is either very hot, very cold, or it's very acidic. So we probably wouldn't be able to get in this water, but archaea can live there. The next group would be Eubacteria. This is also sometimes just called bacteria. It is also single-celled, and it is also a prokaryote, which means that it does not have a nucleus. So bacteria can be helpful or it can be harmful. I know we all know what harmful bacteria would be, but what is an example of a helpful bacteria? Well, one example of helpful bacteria would be the bacteria that lives in our stomachs and the bacteria that we consume when we eat things like yogurt. The bacteria like helps to protect our bodies from, outside forces. So the good bacteria can protect our body from the bad bacteria. And remember how we talked about that washing your hands is usually a better option than using hand sanitizer, because when you use hand sanitizer on your hands, you're killing the good bacteria and the bad bacteria. But when you wash your hands, you are just killing the bad bacteria. The next group would be the eukaryotes. They are multi-celled, so they are made up of more than one cell, and they do have a nucleus, which means that they are eukaryotes. So there's prokaryotes and there's eukaryotes. Prokaryotes do not have a nucleus, eukaryotes do have a nucleus. And the eukaryota group can be split into 4 different kingdoms. We have plantae, animalia, fungi, and protista. So I have some pictures on the right of all of these different groups that could be in the eukaryotic category. So there is a baby, there's a bee, there's plants, there's a protist, and there's fungi. So now we're going to talk a little bit about kingdoms, which is the group below domain. So domain would be the largest group and kingdom would be the next largest group. So there are 6 types of kingdoms that we can put organisms into. Um, the first 4 would be the 4 that we just talked about, the Animalia, Plantae, Fungi, and Protista. But there are 2 other groups called Eubacteria and Archaebacteria. Eubacteria and Archaebacteria are both unicellular and prokaryotic, and they are a lot harder to see. So in our class, we are most familiar with the plants, animals, fungi, and protists. So, what is the point of all this? Why do we even worry about classifying organisms? So, if we take a look at the picture on the right, notice how the domain, which is at the upper right hand corner, the words that go along the top of the chart. So, notice how the domain has the greatest number of organisms within it. And then as you move to the left on the chart, there are fewer and fewer organisms in each group. So at the end, we would reach the genus and the species, and these are what we use when we name an organism. So in this graph right here, we basically want to figure out what is the bear that is at the top, and once we have narrowed it all the way down, we have figured out that it is an American black bear, and its scientific name is Ursus americanus. So notice how that is written in italics right above the name in parentheses because that is its scientific name. Um, it's also important to note that animals that are in the same species can mate and produce fertile offspring. Only animals that are in the same species. If 2 animals are not in the same species, they sometimes they can mate, but the offspring that they produce would not be able to have more offspring. So we can thank the scientist Carolus Linnaeus for coming up with our system for naming organisms. He introduced something called binomial nomenclature in the 1700s. Binomial nomenclature is a big word that basically just means a name has 2 parts. So the word binomial means to name, and nomenclature means name system. So it literally means it's a to name system. So if that's confusing to you, maybe you have heard that humans are called Homo sapiens. So there are 2 parts to our name. That is our scientific name. So the first part would be Homo, the second part would be sapiens. A grizzly bear's scientific name is Ursus horribilis. So how do we name these organisms? So you can think of this binomial nomenclature as an organism having a first and a last name. So the genus is always the first name and the species is always the last name. The genus always starts with a capital letter and the species always starts with a lowercase letter. And when you are typing these names on a computer, you would italicize them, which is the words that are kind of slanted a little bit. And if you're writing it on a piece of paper, you could underline it. So I went through and I did this with the human scientific name for Homo sapiens. So the H is capitalized, the S is lowercase, and it's written in italics at the bottom. So one reason that we would want to name organisms like this is so that people all around the world will know what we are talking about. So scientists can come from all over the world. And so if we just call something, oh, this is a black bear, if you were talking to somebody who is German, a scientist who is German, they don't know what the word black or the word bear means. So we would need to have a universal naming system so that everybody can understand. So when we dig deeper into the world of classification, we see that there is usually a pattern that occurs when we are naming them. So pretty much every name is Greek or it's Latin, or it comes from a root word that is Greek or Latin. Um, Sometimes the animal is named after a location. It could be the location that it is found. So the first person that ever found that animal may have named it after where they found it. It could also be named after a physical characteristic. It sometimes is also named after the person who discovered the organism, or sometimes it's named after a famous person, and sometimes they just name it something funny. So one example is the fungus that is up in the picture on the right. It kind of looks like a sponge. It's actually a fungus, but do you have any guesses of who they named it after? I'll give you a second before I go to the next slide. So they actually named it after Spongebob Squarepants. This is a real scientific name for this fungus. It's Spongiforma squarepantsii. They literally named it after SpongeBob SquarePants because they thought that it looked like a sponge, like from SpongeBob SquarePants. So sometimes the names actually do make sense of why they would name it this way. So you might be thinking, if I find a plant or an animal and I can't identify it, how will I know what its scientific name is? And that's the next thing that we're going to talk about. There is something called a dichotomous key, and a dichotomous key is a tool that is used to identify organisms. A dichotomous key is usually in a book or some kind of like a paper format. Sometimes you can find them online. But a dichotomous key asks a series of questions that have yes or no answers. So by answering the yes or no questions, characteristics can be narrowed down so that you can pinpoint an exact organism's scientific name. And there's dichotomous keys for just about every living organism. So that includes plants, animals, fungi, whatever you could possibly want to find out the scientific name of, there's a dichotomous key that will tell you. I've used dichotomous keys in pretty much every class that I ever took. And they're a really great tool to have because they make it a lot easier to find out what a scientific name is. So we're going to work on a simple dichotomous key together. So the first step in any dichotomous key is choosing an organism that you want to identify. So I have this group of 6 aliens right here, and I'm going to pick the alien on the end that's circled in red. So first you choose one of the organisms. Then you're going to read the questions that come with your dichotomous key. You start with number 1. You always start with number 1. So we read the question number 1 and we make a choice. Is statement A true or is statement B true? So statement A says that the mouth is open. Statement B says that the mouth is not open. Well, clearly, if we look at our alien on the right, his mouth is open. So we follow beside where it says mouth open and it has all the little dots, and then it says go to number 2. So that tells us what number we read next. At this point, if his mouth was not open, we would say, okay, letter B is true. So we would go to number 4. So you would be skipping some to go to number 4, but you always follow the directions that it gives you. So it may seem confusing when you first start out, but you just do exactly what it tells you to do. So for our purposes, his mouth is open, so we're going to go to number 2. So now we read number 2. Does our alien have arms or no arms? So now, once again, we have to pick, is statement A true or is statement B true? Statement A says that he does have arms. Statement B says that he does not have arms. So statement A is clearly true. He does have arms, and it looks like he's waving to us. So we will go to number 3. If he did not have any arms, notice that instead of it telling us to go to another number, it has the words alienus quadlegicus. That's because at this point, we would have been able to identify him if he didn't have any arms, and that would be his scientific name. But once again, for our purposes, he does have arms, so we're going to keep on going to number 3. So now we read number 3 and decide if the alien is hairy or not hairy. So we would choose A or B. And once again, he is going to be choice A. He is hairy. So we look over beside all the little dots, and we see that it says Alienus hairicus. That means that that is his scientific name. So we figured out exactly what he is by following along with the dichotomous key. And once again, if he was not hairy, we could also determine what he is. So he would be Alienus tritoothicus. So I put the rest of the aliens on the screen so that you can use the dichotomous key below to figure out the scientific names for the other aliens. So pause the video, get out a piece of paper, and try to figure out what they are. I'm not going to give you the answers during this PowerPoint, but the answers will be in the Quizlet that I'm also going to give you at the end of this. So try and figure out what they are on your own. So pause the video, and I'm going to keep going. So you should have paused the video and written down what you think each alien would be. So all of these aliens belong to the same genus. What would be their genus? Remember that when we have a scientific name, it's composed of a genus and a species. The genus is the first name, the species is the last name. So what genus would these aliens be in? They would all be part of the Alienus genus. They each have a different species name, but they all have the same genus name. So now, once again, on the left, look at all the different names for each alien. How do you think that the names for these organisms were chosen? So remember, we said that it could be based off of a location that the organisms were found. It could be based off of a physical characteristic. It could be based off of the scientists who discovered them. But for this in this case, they are definitely being named after their physical characteristics. So notice that Alienus quadlegicus, quad means four, and legicus means leg. So it's an alien that has four legs, and there's only one alien that has four legs. We have Alienus hericus, so he is a hairy alien. We have Alienus tritoothicus. Tri means three, and toothicus is tooth, so he has three teeth. Alienus stripicus, he has stripes on his horns. Alienus blobicus, he kind of just looks like a blob. And Alienus fuzzicus is the fuzzy looking alien. So they're clearly named after their physical characteristics. So sometimes it's a lot easier to figure out than we think. But always going through the dichotomous key will guarantee that you are going to get the correct answer every time. You can Google a dichotomous key for just about anything. I use them all the time. If I can't figure out what a tree is or a plant is, basically, if you know what the leaf looks like or a picture of the leaf, you can go through a whole dichotomous key and figure out exactly what tree it came off of. So I created a Quizlet. Ms. Foxwell or another teacher is going to provide the link for you to the Quizlet. It's not a very long Quizlet. It just has some of the important vocabulary words and some of the concepts that we talked about in this PowerPoint. So you can go through the flashcards, you can play the matching game, and try to take the Quizlet test. And you can play the games and take the test until you get a 100%. So I hope that this PowerPoint with the voiceover was really helpful for you guys. I just wanted to make sure that this was something that you guys understood how to do, and I figured the easiest way to do that would be for me to actually explain everything to you. I'm sorry that we're not in school right now, but I hope that this was helpful. And I will be able to answer any questions that you have about this. So wherever it's posted, you can make a comment and I will get back to your questions. All right, you guys, I will see you soon.